Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 13 Pro Max and the iPhone 15 Pro Max are both great phones and have a lot of similarities. However, I wanted to help you decide if maybe you should upgrade to the latest 15 Pro Max or either stick with your 13 Pro Max or upgrade to it. So we'll compare everything from the overall design to the displays to the cameras and more. Now the first thing is the price. Availability depends on where you live, of course, but the 13 Pro Max is no longer sold new by Apple. This was available new for 1 year, and then they started selling it either refurbished or through third-party retailers. With the 15 Pro Max, it goes up to $1,599, and we have 256, 512, and 1 terabyte options. We still have a 128 gigabyte option for the 13 Pro Max, but I typically don't recommend that version as it has some limitations. When it comes to the colors, well, many people consider the 13 Pro Max to have the best color Apple ever made with the Sierra Blue. They also introduced an Alpine Green color later on, and then we had gold, graphite, and silver. With the 15 Pro Max, we have natural titanium, we have the blue that I have here, as well as black and white. So they've changed it a bit since we have a new material around the outside edge. Of course, the 13 Pro Max has stainless steel all the way around the outside edge, which is a shiny and glossy stainless steel that does have a tendency to scratch toward the bottom, but it's not that big of a deal. You can sort of polish it out, and it's been around that way for a long time. We have lightning, of course, and it's just a very traditional look. With the 15 Pro Max, Apple switched the overall design and hardware to titanium. So instead of just stainless steel, we have titanium, which may or may not be durable over time. We don't really know yet, but it has a coating on it, and you'll see it's starting to be chipped off on mine a little bit as I dropped it once on a tile floor. So I have dropped the other one on a carpet, but never on a floor. And of course we have the action button, which is all new, replacing the silent switch. And on the bottom, we have USB-C. So Apple has switched over to this, changed the design a little bit, but everything else is very, very similar. So it's very much the same iPhone with the exception of the switch on the side and the overall materials. The newer titanium frame does make it a lot lighter though. The iPhone 13 Pro Max comes in at 8.46 ounces or 240 grams, where the iPhone 15 Pro Max comes in at 7.81 ounces or 221 grams. It's not as big of a difference as you would think, but you can feel it a little bit, and the balance on the newer 15 Pro Max seems to be a little bit better. Now, of course, we have ceramic shield on the front, and you can see the bezels are also narrower on the newer phone. And we, of course, have the dynamic island. So those are the changes as far as the overall differences there, but the displays are basically the same. So we have 6.7-inch displays, but just thinner bezels on the 15 Pro Max, and slightly different resolutions, but very similar pixel density, 458 versus 460, depending on the device. The 15 Pro Max does go much brighter though. It goes up to 1600 nits in HDR or 2000 nits in sunlight, where the 13 Pro Max only goes up to 1200 nits. So it's definitely not as bright of a display. The 15 Pro Max is much better that way. And it also has an always-on display. So you turn off the display. If you want to use this feature, you can see the wallpaper, you can see the time in the background, and it has that option. So it's got that always-on display if it's something you want to use. Many people turn that off to save battery, but if you want to use it, this is the phone to have. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, we have the dynamic island on the 15 Pro Max. The dynamic island is a way of sort of hiding the camera and reducing the overall size of the notch, but Apple has cleverly used it as sort of a notification area, although not as much as many would have hoped. So it's used for things such as live activities or music. If maybe we play a song, swipe home, it goes to the dynamic island. If we want to start a timer, we could do that, press start, swipe home, it goes to the dynamic island. So it's really nice to have that. Swipe back and forth to switch. You can go back and forth to the dynamic island and sort of utilize it that way. Go back in, cancel things, whatever you'd like to do. It makes it very convenient and something that is just nice to have there, but not necessarily necessary. However, with the dynamic island, it actually cuts into some photos and videos depending on how you're using it. And you'll see with a video, it actually has the dynamic island interfering with the left side of the video or the right side, depending on how you're holding the phone. With the notch, it actually is lined up perfectly not to interfere with the video, even in an 18:9 aspect ratio. So that's something you might want to consider. You can, of course, zoom in on both of the footage. So if we zoom in just a little bit here, you'll see the dynamic island actually is still there, of course, and then you have the notch. So either way, it's a little bit of an interference into the video, but one may bother you more than the other. So that's something to consider if that's going to be an annoyance for you. As far as PWM, or pulse width modulation, as the way the phone controls brightness, it's actually flickering the display faster or slower. And you'll see at 240 frames per second, it's mostly non-existent as long as you're above about 29% brightness. If you are, this shouldn't really bother your eyes at all. However, the 15 Pro Max is at a higher rate, so it really shouldn't bother those that are sensitive to PWM. If you are sensitive to it, I would go with the 15 Pro Max. Either way, though, it shouldn't bother most people. If you're super sensitive to it, you may have to go with an LCD phone that doesn't use PWM. But either way, I've had no issues with eye strain or feeling nauseous or just having headaches caused from these at all. So I think they've done a good job, especially with the 15 Pro Max there. Now, when it comes to the speakers, if we go back into that same video, I'll play a sample for you so you can hear maybe the difference. We'll take a look at the volume as well. Data, it will need your location to determine where you are on that map, but otherwise it will save you some power from downloading the map in real time over and over. One setting I get asked about all of the time is if you should use auto brightness, and according to Apple, absolutely you should 99% of the time. And but otherwise, it will save you some power from downloading the map in real time over and over. One setting I get asked about all of the time is if you should use auto brightness. And according to Apple, absolutely you should 99% of the time. And the reason for that is, with the 15 Pro Max, you may have noticed that it went a little bit louder, around 75 decibels, where the 13 Pro Max went to about 73. There's not a huge difference there. However, the 15 Pro Max definitely sounds a little clearer at the higher volume levels. But I don't think there's a big enough difference that it will be much of an issue, but the 15 Pro Max definitely sounds better, at least to me. Now, when it comes to the overall battery life, the iPhone 13 Pro Max has a 4,352 milliamp hour battery, and the 15 Pro Max has a larger battery at 4,422 milliamp hours, which Apple says is good for 1 hour more of video playback. However, if you look at the battery, according to Apple, video streaming playback is the same, audio playback and standby is the same between both of them. Most people that use the 13 Pro Max remember it as having some of the best battery life we've ever had in an iPhone. However, with the latest iOS 17 updates, it seems to be basically the same. So I really don't see much of a difference there. I wouldn't buy one over the other just for battery life based off of that. Now, as charging speeds are the same as well, Apple hasn't updated that. Despite it having USB-C on the newer phones, it's still 50% in about 30 to 35 minutes. With a 20 to 30 watt charger. So Apple really isn't doing anything as far as that goes, but the USB-C does allow for faster data transfer speeds if maybe you're exporting video. We'll talk more about that when we talk about the cameras. Now, internally, we have some very impressive specs on the new phone. If we go over to Geekbench here, we'll go into Geekbench 6. You'll see with the 13 Pro Max, we have the A15 Bionic with about 6 gigabytes of RAM. With the 15 Pro Max, we have the A17 Pro chipset with 8 gigabytes of RAM. If we take a look at the overall benchmarks, you're going to see that there's actually a big difference there. So if we take a look at the CPU benchmarks, we'll run one here, we'll run one on the other phone and take a look. Benchmarks completed, and you'll see the difference here with 2,349 for single core on the 13 Pro Max compared to 2,817 on the 15 Pro Max. Multi-core is a bigger jump at 5,682 for the 13 Pro Max and 7,145 for the 15 Pro Max. And these numbers don't necessarily mean how it will perform in everyday life, but if we go into a game, maybe Minecraft here, let's open this up, and I'll just show you the difference in load speeds, if any at all. You'll see we loaded a little bit quicker on the 15 Pro Max. We'll go into play, create new world, again, create. We'll tap create and give it just a second here. We'll tap proceed, even though we were a little bit behind there. And see how fast it actually builds the terrain. It shouldn't take too long at all, and they're going to be very similar. Even though I still had to press the button on the 15 Pro Max, the 13 Pro Max isn't too far behind, and the 15 Pro Max is able to play AAA games that we're going to see with things such as Resident Evil, Assassin's Creed, and more. So those things will be coming out later if they're not out by the time you're watching this video. But either way, they're both very smooth that way. And then another thing you may do that's processor intensive is maybe if you went into iMovie. So we'll go into that. You'll see here, we've got the exact same clip. I've got it here with my text on it. If we scroll through, I just put a few together with transitions and more, and they're the same time frame on both. So 3 minutes and 34 seconds. You'll see they're identical here. Let's bring in a stopwatch and see how quickly we can actually export these. So we'll go ahead and hit done. And let's see if we can hit save video at the same time and hit start. So there we go, we're exporting both, and let's see if there's any difference with the different processors. And as you saw, the 13 Pro Max finished about a second quicker than the 15 Pro Max exporting video. So when you're doing certain tasks, there's not going to be as big of a difference as other tasks. However, there are differences when it comes to the cameras and recording video. With the front-facing cameras, the 13 Pro Max has a 12 megapixel sensor with f2.2 aperture. However, it doesn't utilize the photonic engine and doesn't have autofocus. The 15 Pro Max has a 12 megapixel sensor also, but f1.9 and has autofocus and photonic engine capability, so it actually can process the video a little bit differently. The rear cameras is where they're significantly different. With the 13 Pro Max, all three camera lenses are 12 megapixels. The main camera, or just regular wide camera, is an f1.5 aperture. The ultra wide is an f1.8, and we have a telephoto up to 3 times with an f2.8 aperture. The 15 Pro Max increases this significantly with a 48 megapixel main sensor, f1.78 aperture, ultra-wide 12 megapixel f2.2, and a telephoto up to 5 times optical zoom with an f2.8 aperture. We also have a lens selection option which sort of emulates the overall selection of different lenses when you're taking a photo. So if we tap on the 1X on the 15 Pro Max, we've got 35 millimeters, 24, and 28. So you can zip between each one of those, which really looks different. It's not just zooming in, it's actually changing the way it looks. We also have digital zoom up to 25 times on the 15 Pro Max instead of about 15 or so. So on the 13 Pro Max, if we unlock it here, we'll go in. And if we want to go to photo and just zoom in all the way, we can go to 15 times zoom. We have 25 on the 15 Pro Max thanks to that new lens. Both can record in 4K 60, but we don't have action mode on the 13 Pro Max. We also have ProRes on both, but only up to 30 frames per second on the 13 Pro Max, where with an external drive, we can actually get up to 4K 60 ProRes video, as well as HDR. Thanks to USB-C, we can plug in an external drive, such as the Samsung T5 drive, go into our video camera here, and give it a second, it will actually show once we switch to ProRes that we have USB-C connected. So we can record directly to an external drive to make getting that footage off of this even faster. It's something that's really great. We also have log recording as well, so if you want to grade your footage, and they look really great. We also have the option for photos to capture depth even without taking a portrait photo. So if you're taking a photo with the 15 Pro Max and it actually recognizes a person or maybe a pet, it will take depth information and save that so you can manipulate the actual depth later on. Lots of really nice upgraded features in the 15 Pro Max with that. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of the photos and videos just to compare them and see what they actually look like. This is the forward-facing camera from the iPhone 15 Pro Max as well as the iPhone 13 Pro Max. It gives you an idea of what the microphone sounds like, as it's pretty windy out right now, and also what the actual video camera looks like. Now, we're not using ProRes, but this is just standard right out of the camera like most people will use, and I don't have HDR enabled. Let me know what you think looks best and sounds best in the comments below. There's also a few other things worth comparing here. We have car crash detection modes on the 15 Pro Max, along with emergency SOS via satellite. For extra security, maybe you're taking a hike or something like that, you've got emergency SOS. And we have the option for call after a severe crash, and this works when you're in a crash and will call emergency services if you let it do that. Also, we have the option for emergency SOS via satellite, which also now works with the 15 Pro Max with roadside assistance in the United States. So it will actually find a satellite and then help you communicate with someone if you need a little extra help. Now, we do have different modems inside as well. Both have 5G, but the 15 Pro Max has an updated 5G modem, which is much faster. It also has Wi-Fi 6E capability, and they have Bluetooth 5.3 as well. So big differences as far as the overall network connectivity, especially if you're utilizing Wi-Fi 6E and you have maybe a lot of different devices on your network, or you use 5G a lot, you'll notice a difference here. Also, they're IP68 certified, 6 meters for 30 minutes, and that's about everything. Now, if you're wondering if you should upgrade to the iPhone 15 Pro Max or the 13 Pro Max or which one you should choose, well, depending on which phone you have already, if you're coming from an iPhone 13 Pro Max, well, there's a few factors to consider. You're not going to see any difference in battery life really, but if you care about the cameras, USB-C, the titanium frame, and the overall display and the dynamic island, those are reasons to upgrade. The camera is a significant upgrade as far as the video capabilities go. The photos do look better to me, but in general, if you don't care about any of those things and you just want good battery life and a decent experience that's very similar, well, then the 13 Pro Max is worth sticking with or upgrading to. If you're coming from an iPhone 10 or maybe an iPhone 8, the iPhone 13 Pro Max is also a great upgrade choice as it's a significant jump over those previous phones. However, if both phones were the exact same price, I would definitely go with the 15 Pro Max as it's going to be updated and supported for at least 5 more years, where the 13 Pro Max probably has at least 3 more years or so, but we don't really know as Apple doesn't say. But the new features on the 15 Pro Max are worth it to me, but they may not be to you. So let me know which one you choose in the comments below, and hopefully that helped you decide which one's better for you. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.